Welcome back to the Wine and Book Show. I have a very special guest on the show. His name is Tom Cook.
Hey, Ryan. Thanks for having me on. Don't know how special I am, but I appreciate it.
How do you get started filmmaking?
It's a long and complicated story. I'll work my way through it. As many people, and I think we're a culture, we're a world that likes entertainment. When I was a kid, I always ended up watching movies just constantly. My dad would bring home movies, actual 16mm films from the public library, and we'd watch them. And my weekends were always spent in the theater. So I was constantly watching those things and enjoying them. Excuse me. When I got to my undergrad degree at Purdue University, I actually went up to Purdue. I lived in Indianapolis, grew up in Indianapolis, and Purdue is in West Lafayette, about an hour and a half away. So as a senior, I went up there. I knew I was going to Purdue, and I started scheduling for classes. And this guy was there, an advisor, and he said, what would you like to take? You need to take a humanities. Well, here's a course on Alfred Hitchcock. And I was like, what do you mean? You just like learn about him? No, you watch a movie every week. And holy cow, I found out that you could get credit and get a degree in film watching. Purdue didn't have a production program at the time. But so I ended up, one of my undergrad degrees, I have two of them, one's in English, one's in film criticism. And that really got me thinking about when I graduated, I wanted to go to graduate school for a production program because I did want to make films. And so looked around and decided to go to Northwestern University, which is up in Chicago. I'm a big Cubs fan, so I figured, hey, I can go to graduate school, learn how to make movies, and watch the Cubs. So my wife, well, my fiance and I got married. She's a pharmacist working for Walgreens now, and so she accepted a job at Walgreens. We moved up to Chicago, and it was then that I found out, this shows you how much research I did at the time, that Northwestern didn't have a production program. So unfortunately, she'd accepted a job, we'd moved to Chicago, and so I spent a couple of years, we were there for 5 or 6 years, and I was working for a subsidiary of DC Comics. And so I was doing their role-playing games and working with the Superman and Batman line. But I was constantly working with my friends, using video cameras, shooting stupid little videos and movies and things like that. And at some point, it kind of struck me that I didn't want to be 90 years old and wondering if I could ever make it in the film industry. And so I started applying to graduate schools. I was accepted at Columbia College in Chicago. Boston University accepted me. And actually, while I was doing this application, I attended the University of Southern California's summer program, both to kind of get an idea of what it was like, see if I was interested in that kind of filmmaking, the narrative Hollywood-style stuff. And also, it's good to make contacts because a couple of the guys who taught my classes were on the acceptance program. So when I applied, I was initially put on a wait list, but then I was accepted the second semester. And when Southern Cal, who you know Spielberg, George Lucas, Ron Howard, Bob Zemeckis, huge names go out there. If you're really interested in Hollywood-style filmmaking, there's so much else, and I'm sure we'll talk about all the other venues of filmmaking and video production. But I was really interested in Hollywood mainstream filmmaking, and when USC accepts you, you can't say no. So we made the trek out to LA, and I went to grad school there and did a lot of work in the film and television industry. Television and film were really very separate at the time. It was kind of haughty-taughty that if you worked in film, you didn't have anything to do with television because it was so low-key and low-par. But my first job was actually in television, and I really ended up liking it. So kind of a long evolution of just being interested in it. At some point, just kind of realizing that, gee, maybe I'd like to try and find out if I could make a living at it. And then while I was in grad school, I received a Master of Fine Arts, which allowed me to teach. And so I taught for a little while at USC, particularly in the summer program. And then my first son came along. That was kind of the deal I cut with my wife. Said, if you'll put me through graduate school, you can have a kid, or we can have a kid. Turned out my first son, best thing that ever happened to me. But I had no idea what I was getting into, didn't know about all that. So when he came along, I realized I really had to find some kind of steady work. at the time, and I still think it's pretty much the case, that in professional film and television production, you work about a third of the time, and you're lucky to do that, and you're looking for work about 2/3 of the time. The pay is usually good enough to support you if you're money-wise, and my wife was. But it wasn't a real steady job. I wasn't teaching all the time, wasn't working all the time. And so I realized I kind of had to, holy cow, I've got a family now, I've got a kid to support. And so that's when I went looking around. I found that I enjoyed teaching, found a spot here at Keene State, here in Keene. And I've been there, this is going on my 20th year now.
Wow.
So I've been there ever since. So that's kind of the long and complex story of just the evolution of interest and kind of deciding that that's really what I wanted to do.
Now, how do you get to know Bob, Dad, who filmed Back to the Future?
Yep. That's one of the advantages of when my students talk about going to graduate school. I tell them, in my experience, the best and surest way to get work is through contacts. And there are a lot of great schools out there. I think Keene State is a pretty good one. But for graduate work, we don't have a graduate program. There are a lot of terrific schools out there in the Midwest and other places that don't really have connections to the coast. And so my comment is always, boy, if you're really interested in Hollywood-style, professional narrative filmmaking, you need to stay on one of the coasts, New York or LA. And so that's when I went out to LA. And Bob Zemeckis, it was a 3-year program. First year, you make your basic little videos. Second year, you make intermediate stuff. Third year, you do. It culminates in a 30-minute sync sound color film. My director, I was a cinematographer, co-cinematographer on a film called Persistence of Vision, directed by Lee Unkrich, who is an Academy Award now winner. Congratulations, Lee. For Toy Story 3. He worked on the Toy Story films, and he's a big honcho at Pixar. But while we were making that film over a single semester, the entire class attends one 4-hour course. And we sit and we watch everybody else's stuff. And then you break up into whatever your strengths are. Cinematographers go here. Sound designers go here. Directors go here. And Bob Zemeckis was one of the directing instructors at the time. So he was able to talk about a lot of his things. I think he was working on Who Framed Roger Rabbit at the time. And that's really one of the benefits of going to both a big-name school and a school on the coasts, one of the coasts, is that the people who are working in the industry are there. They either come to teach the classes because they enjoy it, or they come because they're working with students. If you're going there, you need to meet Ryan Bourke and find out and get to know him, because you might be the next up-and-coming director, and good to make contacts with that. So Bob was one of the guys. He happens to be a Cubs fan. I don't know if you remember in Back to the Future 2, Marty goes to the future, and there's a big holographic display that that the Cubs win the World Series. And I think that's in 2015, so we got a couple years left.
Now,
but
how, I'm just curious, but
sure.
in the movie Back to the Future Part 2, how did they whip a car, a dog in the car, and make the car disappear without making the dog die? How did that happen?
Oh, well, that's all obviously special effects. We didn't want, two things are that you never know what the audience is going to latch on to, whether it's I jokingly say that if you see old World War II movies or Westerns, if you see these Westerns, my wife will be more concerned about the poor horses than the guy getting shot. Oh, don't hurt the horse. So you clearly don't want the audience to be upset because Einstein gets hurt. But and he became one of the favorite characters from the first one. And so the producers knew, we're not going to kill Einstein. But clearly all of that is done with special effects. If you see Einstein get in the car, it's not done. And that's one of the things that Bob was always pushing the envelope. We talked about Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was one of the early real professional ways of integrating animation and live action. So Back to the Future was another one too. Bob really likes to push the envelope on special effects, but what I respect most about him in particular, he doesn't do it just for the effect, just for the cheap thrill of it, which I kind of think a lot of the 3D stuff out anymore is. Bob does it so that it integrates into the story, and he uses the technology to tell a story. So that's really kind of what I think interests him, and that's one of the things I respect most about him. But that's clearly how they were able to do all that and not kill Einstein.
Well, now how you get involved with Jay
Roach?
from the Austin Powers movie?
Yep, Jay Roach, who has directed Mystery Alaska, the Austin Powers films. He's kind of a hotshot in L.A. He taught the Peter Stark producing program at USC. There's really kind of three branches of it. There's critical studies, production. So critical studies analyzes the films and writes about them. They're the theorists. Production, we're the people who make the movies, and producers, and they're the money people. Well, they're clearly the authorities. They're the assistant producers, the associate producers, those folks. And so there's the business side of things. But they have to take a couple production classes because you got to know what you're producing. You got to know what you're funding. And so Jay taught beginning and intermediate level production course for them, for the producers. And I was his TA for a while. And so Jay then left my final semester, my final year, and another gentleman stepped in. But Jay was off starting up work on a TV show called Space Rangers. And so he called me, when I graduated, he called me onto that to do behind-the-scenes video, kind of like the making of the Space Rangers and following Pendentium and some of the producers behind there. So, again, one of the ways that you get your work is contacts. Jay was my first contact. He called me up. I was spending months in and out resumes and everything and wondering why. I was kind of a hot shot at USC, supposedly the best film school in the world. Why wasn't Paramount asking me to come work for millions of dollars? Couldn't figure that out. So it really is about contacts, and Jay was the first guy to really give me my break with that.
Now, how do you get to meet Nancy Washington?
Who was that?
The more people you're talking about today?
Right. There's a lot of, if we want to get into, it's both fun and kind of embarrassing to name drop. Kind of work my way backwards, I guess. At USC, again, so many, obviously everybody I worked with is through contacts, because how else are you going to meet them? But beginning production, the earliest one, John Singleton, who was a very famous director, he was my production partner. We didn't work a lot together, but we were responsible for getting equipment and things like that. So John was in what was called the 240 class. Diane Keaton was in my script writing class. She was a very quiet, very nice lady, but she sat in the back, probably because everybody knew she was super famous and she's Diane Keaton. Other folks that I met, one of the most fun things, and you may not recognize, most people wouldn't recognize a lot of these names, but one of the most fun things for me was about halfway through my graduate career, I went into film school thinking I wanted to be an editor, because that's what I did with DC Comics and the role-playing games and things like that, was literary editing. And that seemed to be what I was watching in the theaters. I'd watch how things were cut together and how everything kind of worked along the flow, the visual flow of that. And so that's what I thought I wanted to do when I went into graduate school. Found out very early on, it drove me nuts. Sitting in a small room working on somebody else's film, cutting it together, was not what I wanted. Through various means, I did an internship at Panavision, which is still the most well-respected and largest film camera equipment rental company. And that's where I really found out that I liked visuals. I liked camera work. And I seemed to have a knack for it in doing that. And so I basically started following the cinematography route. And to eventually kind of wrap the story back around, my last year when I was doing that advanced project, the film with Lee Unkrich directing it, my cinematography instructor was supposed to be Woody Omens. He was a kind of head of the production program. He was off shooting an Eddie Murphy film. And so he couldn't make it. And I was really pretty disappointed with all that. Oh, Woody's not going to be able to make it. That's terrible. One of the advantages was he called all of his friends, Alan Davio, Haskell Wexler, Victor Kemper, all of these huge names in cinematography, and they would come and do 1 or 2 weeks for our class. And so while I didn't get to work with Woody quite so closely, I met a whole lot of other folks along that line. So that's probably kind of what was most interesting to me. Directing-wise, we had Jodie Foster came and talked to our class about what was she screening? I'm not exactly sure if it was Silence of the Lambs. It might have been, but there was a venue every week where a film would be shown to everybody, and then somebody affiliated with it would come and talk. The director of Field of Dreams, we saw that, and he was that Joe? I don't remember who exactly directed that, but there was a venue where you could meet a lot of people and talk about that. So that's kind of a lot of those are the folks that I met through my classwork. When I eventually ended up getting work, Jay called me up and brought me on to Space Rangers, where Linda Hunt, who is an Academy Award winner, I believe, for The Year of Living Dangerously. She kind of headed up this group of renegade space cops. Space Rangers was a very short-lived CBS TV show. We shot 6 episodes, only aired 3 of them because we came up against, it was unfortunate, I think we were on Friday night, and we premiered against Babylon 5, which ended up being a little bit more successful and went on a lot longer. So we lost the race to Babylon 5. But worked with Linda Hunt, worked with CCH Pounder, who is a very well-respected actress. She's a really nice lady. On LifePod, yep, which was another Trilogy Entertainment. They did Space Rangers as well. Ron Silver directed LifePod. Robert Loggia was on that. And then Trilogy Entertainment did a lot of other things. They did Blown Away, and several of those other kinds of films. The other folks that actually, so I was really out in the industry for 3 or 4 or 5 years before I accepted my job here at Keene State, thinking that, oh my God, I mean, I'd grown up in large cities. Born in Indianapolis, lived in Chicago, went to LA, and then I come to Keene, New Hampshire. Oh my God, is it the, and I love Keene, don't get me wrong, everybody at Keene. But, oh my, we're like in the middle of nowhere, and my cultural life is all over with. Very first year we're here, Jumanji comes to town. And so a huge film. I see a lot of the people I know coming to town working here, and we can talk about some stories about how Jumanji actually came here. But Robin Williams was working there on that one, obviously.
He's a good comedian and a good actor.
He's a wonderful actor, and he doesn't get, well, he does get the respect anymore, but I think one of his best early works was The World According to Garp. He's not zany, he's not over the top like he was in Good Morning Vietnam and a lot of these other things. He's a wonderful actor and clearly a wonderful comedian because he got his start that way. So that was funny. To see a huge production here in Keene where I thought, nothing was ever going to happen. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of films going on around here. And then maybe a little bit closer and more locally, about 5 or 6 years ago, one of my directors for my advanced project that I was teaching, Nick Schwartz, he didn't end up, he always was, but we found out that he was the great nephew of a rather well-known actor named Martin Landau. And Martin came in for a weekend and shot here, and a lot of places around here, the stage and the pub and lots of other places were able to help us out, kind of cater to Martin, and it was fun to have him around for a couple of weeks. So that's one of the things that's kind of fun about being in this industry is working with some famous folks. And I think you probably know this guy. When I was in Chicago, they were making a film called Risky Business. And a buddy of mine was on that show, and he brought a guy who happened to be named by Tom Cruise.
Oh, yeah.
And Cruise played the laser tag. We had this really good laser tag team. You wear the suits and you go in a dark room and you shoot little lasers, and it's a silly game. But Bruce Young, who, if you remember Risky Business, is this big, burly black guy who played a cross-dresser that Cruise calls up. He's looking for basically a lady of the evening, and somehow Bruce shows up there. Whoops, a little kind of confusion there. But Bruce and Cruise became good buddies, and so the 2 of them and one other guy came and played the other 5 of us on our team and just killed us. They were just murdered us. So Cruise had some kind of natural ability to be great at everything, I guess.
Oh.
So
my favorite friend that Jodie Foster did is this Disney movie. I can't remember the name of the movie, but it's a good movie she did.
Okay. And again, with Disney, I mentioned my buddy Lee Unkrich, and I still stay in touch with Lee, but he did the Toy Story films. Worked, kind of co-directed Toy Story 1 and 2, and then directed exclusively, was the sole director, and won an Academy Award for Toy Story 3, which I think the Pixar stuff is extremely clever. You know, and really has elevated animation to a new level. I thought Toy Story, the original one, was just a brilliant film.
That was a good film. I got it all.
Oh yeah, got all 3 as well.
Now, how you got involved with Jumanji?
Jumanji was one where, strangely enough, for the people who are watching this and living in Keene, we nearly missed out. The location scout. I became involved when it was clear that TriStar was going to come and shoot here, and so Keene State called the city of Keene, and John McClane called the Keene State Film Program, you know, looking for some advice, and so I stepped on to the board with them, kind of as an advisor about, you know, whether they should do it, what they should do it, because initially they didn't want TriStar, this huge production company coming and, you know, making a huge mess and tying up traffic and everything like that. And my advice was, oh my God, you've got to get, if the film is huge, that it could be a real attraction. People could be coming here to see where Jumanji was shot. That didn't turn out to be the case, but you know, it's going to bring huge money into the town, and it's not going to disrupt things, so I think that worked pretty well. When I was on the advisory board, I met with the location scout, and he was apparently just driving around in the area and wanted a cup of coffee, and so he turned up Main Street to find a cup of coffee, and as he's driving up Main Street, you see this beautiful downtown, you see the beautiful church spire at the end of the square, and he said, this is it. So it was really kind of happenstance that Jumanji really came here, but then so that's how, I mean, it certainly didn't have anything to do with bringing them here, but I was involved when TriStar came. We were the local film program, obviously, and so a lot of our students worked on it and were actors in it as well. So it was great, I think, for the entire community to really see a lot of stuff. And you'll still see, as you're driving around, you still see signs that they painted on the sides of buildings and things like that, so it's kind of fun.
Now, you say you can do voices?
I do what? Voices? We talked briefly off air about my work in radio, perhaps, if that's what you're alluding to. And I did a lot of early work in radio in high school, and then some professional stuff while I was going to Purdue. I do, and one of the things that tied that into it was Tim Renshaw, good buddy of mine, was my radio instructor in high school. Stayed in contact with him all these years. And about 5 or 6 years ago, out of the blue, he contacts me because he's actually doing an internet radio show called Star Trek: The Continuing Mission, and he got the role as captain of the Montana. So he called me on, and I actually do a voiceover part where I'm the admiral of one of the stations there, and so I get to berate him and things like that. So I do radio shows, radio reviews, and things like that. Obviously, you know that. And so that's kind of the voice work that I do.
Wow.
What else?
Who's your famous person you meet?
The most famous?
The most famous.
Is probably Tom Cruise. And again, he wouldn't. I'm sure he wouldn't remember me if I'd mentioned that, you know, he was with Bruce and stuff like that. He might remember that event. But probably the most well-known would be Cruise. Again, Martin Landau, he was great when he came here because he's such a nice guy, and he's got such a wealth of stories. He talked about working with Hitchcock, which is one of his early roles in film. Because he was in North by Northwest. But Martin was terrific with my students because major motion pictures, and even the motion pictures that we make, it's all a lot of hurry up and wait. You'll spend 12 hours a day shooting maybe 5 minutes of film. And so it's setting everything up. And in his off time, he would sit around and he would talk to our cinematographers, he'd talk to the director. In particular, he talked with our actress, and because he worked real closely with one of our actors, and would give her advice and give her tips and things like that. So Martin was a great resource to have around here, and a real nice guy. Most of the people that you'll meet professionally, I think they know, actors in particular, know that, I mean, they need to be treated well, because if you mislike them or something like that, they're not going to look all that great. But you're spending 12, 15 hours a day. When we worked on LifePod, which was the CBS Movie of the Week, our last production day was 72 hours.
Wow.
Because you couldn't break, because then you'd go, there were all sorts of rules relative to the unions and things like that. So our last single day was a 72-hour. When you're spending that kind of time, it doesn't really pay to be a grump or be unpleasant. And so the vast, vast majority of actors I've worked with are extremely nice, extremely pleasant, and Martin certainly proved that case.
Now, I just want to quickly say that Bob, what's his name?
Bob Zemeckis.
Zemeckis and
Jay Roach.
Watts
Yep.
did a very nice job with the Morpheus, and I'm going to put that on top up here to congratulate them.
Okay.
And I want to congratulate Jodie Foster for doing a nice job.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, it's, you know, I think everybody, it's such, I wanted to direct, everybody says that what I really want to do is direct. When I had my opportunity in graduate school, I found that I don't have the temperament. I like my directors to tell me, here's the visual shot, and I'll go get it for them. But it's a particular strength, and I think Bob is clearly good at it. Works with, and you'll see Bob and Jay and big directors always working with the same people. We talked about Diane Keaton, who was in my script writing class. She's always doing stuff with Woody Allen because you find a good group of people that you like to work with, and then you can make good films. And I think Jay and Bob both tend to do it.
So that's my tip with the hat to them.
I will second that.
Thank you.
For you. So, but you seem to be a big fan of the Back to the Futures, right? Are those your favorite? What's your favorite film?
My favorite film is Back to the Future.
Is it really the first one? Okay. It's my favorite. I really like how cleverly they twist the story around in 2 and 3, but I think Back to the Future has got to be my favorite of the 3, quite clearly.
Well, I want to say thank you for coming on tonight.
Always happy to be here. Thank you very much for having me. And I hope you do well. Take care.
Bye.